Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Information Studies 752 lecture. This week we'll be focusing on exhibits, a very valuable and a pretty interesting part of archival outreach. Okay, so our weekly topics for this week are: how can exhibits be effective outreach tools for archives, and which factors should archives consider when determining which materials to place in exhibits? Before we focus on exhibits specifically, though, we'll talk about the connection between outreach and advocacy, which is something that the Hackman article for this week discusses, or the Hackman chapter or excerpt, I guess, for this week focuses on. And Hackman argues that advocacy is something that really needs to be focused both on internal decision makers and colleagues, but also outside organizations and individuals. So not just focusing entirely on one category of individuals or organizations to approach, but both internal and external individuals and organizations, with the hope of turning them into supporters and advocates for the archive and the future. And so the key tools of developing these advocates is, of course, outreach. So exhibits, a lot of the activities we'll be talking about for the next few weeks, but also some more kind of a smaller scale types of outreach as well. So the Reddit article for this week mentions some. So staff meetings can be a great opportunity for an archive to discuss what the archive is up to, discuss the value of the archives, the relevance of the archives. One-on-one meetings with individuals both inside and outside of an organization can also be great opportunities for the archives to talk about, what they're doing and the value that archives bring to whatever organization they're a part of. So while we're going to focus on exhibits, social media instruction, and websites, there's definitely sort of more directly interpersonal types of outreach that archives can and really should engage in as well. So while Hackman states that archives should approach both internal and external audiences, he writes that the internal audience is oftentimes going to be the most important one, because they can have the most direct influence on the infrastructure that an archive has to work with, which makes a lot of sense. If your archives is a part of your university's library department, then whoever is the director of that department is probably going to have more impact on your archive's day-to-day life than someone who is external to your university, just because they have more power to develop your budget. They have more power to possibly serve as advocates to people higher up in the food chain. So yeah, because of this influence that internal audience members have, it's a really good idea to focus on them. And as I just touched on, Hackman argues that the decision maker above the archive should be a prime subject of advocacy. So again, if your archives is part of your university's library department, it's a good idea to focus on the director of the library department, not just because of the power that they can wield over your archives infrastructure and day-to-day operations, but also because they have a vested interest in seeing your archive succeed. So if your archive looks good, then they look good. And that's going to want to hopefully make them support you as much as possible. But at the same time, you have to give them reasons to extend that support. So it's not just a given that they're necessarily going to support you. You know, if the archives and you know, the library are both parts of the same department, then you know, the department head may choose to focus on supporting the archives and focus on supporting the library and not necessarily the archive as much. So even though someone may have a vested interest in seeing you succeed, they still need to be kind of courted and reminded of the importance that archives provide and have. Another benefit that Hackman mentions is that people directly above the archives may have relationships and knowledge of the organization that people in the archive itself may not have. So, you know, your department head may have relationships with the university provost or the university president, or maybe other department heads that even the head of the archives may not have. And so these are useful relationships to leverage. And so again, that's why it's a good idea to make sure you stay on the right side of people directly above the archives. And as I mentioned before, it's important to focus on external advocates as well. It may be that external advocates can influence internal decision makers. So maybe there's someone in the community that can influence your department head to advocate on your behalf, maybe a friend or you know, someone that they, I don't know, their kids are friends, or you know, maybe they go golfing together or whatever. These people outside of your organization may be able to put in a good word for your archives with the people inside the university that you want to support you. And so that's an important thing to keep in the back of your mind. And of course, external advocates can also provide things like grants or some kind of financial support, maybe connections to other people that are willing or interested in providing support to your archives. A little networking is always valuable. Or, you know, they may have some really great collection material that they're interested in donating. So while Hackman argues that these external advocate targets may not be as directly influential as more internal targets, there's still a lot of benefit towards courting them. You know, you never want to put all of your eggs in one basket. And if you approach advocacy on kind of like a broad continuous front, as we've discussed in this course, then you increase the number of people that you're approaching. And you know, if it turns out that your department head doesn't like your archives for whatever reason, then you may have some people outside of the archives that can either help you shift your department head's opinion or provide support that may not come from your department head. So again, kind of like a broad continuous effort is always a good idea. Of course, one aspect of courting external advocates, especially if you're looking to them to influence internal decision makers, is you have to know who internal decision makers have some kind of connection or some kind of a relationship with. And that's something that Hackman talks about on page 21. He talks about developing relationship files, which maybe seems a little weird, maybe even a little creepy. But you know, it's good to just kind of learn what you can, hopefully in not a very intrusive or kind of underhanded way, and try and leverage those relationships as much as is necessary, and as much as you as an archive feel comfortable. So yeah, it's kind of like a fine line between courting external advocates to influence internal decision makers without yeah, seeming like you're kind of like spying on people and really intruding into their lives. So it's something that has to be done with some tact and some subtlety, but you know, I can definitely see how this might be a beneficial strategy for archives to progress towards. So to talk a little bit more about the connection between outreach and advocacy, so pretty simply, we have outreach, which increases the awareness of value of an archives, and that in turn can lead towards people advocating on the archive's behalf. So, you know, if people don't think that your archive provides value, if they don't think that your archive contributes to whatever they believe in or whatever they're trying to get done, then it's pretty unlikely that they're going to take the time and effort to advocate for your archives. So developing an awareness of the value of your archives is pretty important. And one of the ways that this can be done is through demonstrating the use of your archives. So the number of uses of your archives, and you can also touch on the types of use of your archives. And these can be great ways to demonstrate your value to people that you want to advocate on your behalf. You can say, hey, we had, you know, 150 people come into the reading room last week. You know, we had 600 people looking at our online collections, and so on and so forth. And that's sort of one way that you can demonstrate the value of your archives. Or you could say, you know, people using our archives published 5 papers last year, and just kind of highlight some specific uses of your archives. And of course, people aren't going to use your archives unless they sort of understand it and value it as well. So, you know, all of this ties back to these outreach opportunities that we're talking about as means to increase the awareness of the value of your archives and in part drive the use of your archives. Now, it's not necessarily true that use is going to be the most important thing that a potential advocate is going to look at. Maybe they see ways that your archive has contributed to the community. Maybe your archives did an exhibit about something that really appeals to them, and they don't really care how many people use the archives. They just kind of see the value of what the archives are doing, and that's enough for them to be an advocate. So use isn't necessarily the only way that archives can demonstrate an awareness of their value. And we'll talk about some ways that archives can do that, both through the lens of exhibits and through other means as we progress through this course. Okay, so to focus more on exhibits specifically, the topic of this week, it's interesting to think about how exhibits can increase an awareness of the value of archives. How can exhibits demonstrate that what archives do and the materials that they have provide value to the community that the archive is in, to the organization that the archive is a part of, and so on. And our readings touch on a few different ways that this can happen. So one way that both the Tatsumi and Sims article mentions is through public programming based off the exhibit. So having guest lecturers come and talk about materials in the exhibit or the exhibit topic, having receptions surrounding the opening of the exhibit. The Tatsumi article talks about how that was particularly effective in getting a senior university administrator there to see the exhibit and learn more about the archive. Doing things like guided tours or class visits surrounding the exhibit. Really, the sky is the limit. And this is a great way not only to demonstrate the value of the archives, but to take advantage of something that you've already created. So rather than just having the exhibit and saying, okay, that's kind of the beginning and the end, having all these kind of ancillary events and other opportunities for the public to learn more about the materials and to learn more about the value that archives have. Another important aspect of demonstrating the value of the archives, or sort of piggybacking on the exhibit, is also in the Tatsumi article, where the author talked about how the team behind the exhibit followed up with University of Maryland faculty for opportunities to speak about the exhibit. So not just having the exhibit itself, but having some follow through with people who were the intended audience for the exhibit, and making sure that they're aware of the exhibit, they're aware of the materials in the exhibit, and they were aware that the archive was interested in providing some instructional sessions to provide additional information about the Prang collection. And of course, all these extra steps sort of surrounding the exhibit that really can give the exhibit more value and can help the exhibit be an effective way to demonstrate the value of archives. Ideally, those choices about what events happen are going to be based on influencing specific people, which goes back to this idea of planning and making sure that the outreach steps that your archive engages in are planned, and they're meant to accomplish a specific goal. And so it's important to think about how exhibits can be more effective at influencing key people. And again, it's going to depend on different individuals and sort of what they value and what they like, but there are ways that archives can frame exhibits in a way that that may be more likely to influence the people that archives want to value them and support them and serve as advocates. So one way that archives can do this is through framing exhibits as serious works of scholarship, which is something that the Tatsumi article talks about. And this really focuses on archives as curators and creators of knowledge. And that's obviously something that can be highly regarded and valued, especially within an academic setting. So it's not just an exhibit, it's something that took hours and hours of research and skill to kind of put together. And that's something that can be pretty highly valued, especially if you are an archive in a university. The Tatsumi article also talks about using the Prang collection exhibit as a way to highlight the multidisciplinary nature of archives. So saying, archives aren't just about history. They have all these other connections to, graphic design, to international relations, and all these other topics that the Prang collection was connected to in the exhibit. So again, that's just demonstrating that archives don't just have value for historians, but they have value to people studying other fields as well. And the great thing about the Prang exhibit highlighting the multidisciplinary nature of that particular collection is that was something that the University of Maryland was really interested in seeing. They wanted to see resources that really, focus on multiple areas of study. And the Prang collection was also able to support the intra-institutional collaboration that University of Maryland administrators wanted to see as well. So that's another thing that the archives can point at and say, look, we are really able to work with different faculty members in different fields and have a good collaboration, surrounding this exhibit and surrounding the collection itself. And the testimony article also talks about how the Prang team worked to highlight how the Prang exhibit supported the educational goals of the University of Maryland students. So, anytime you are working in a university archive and you develop a resource that is going to be helpful for educating students, there's obviously a strong connection between that and the overall mission of the university itself. And that's certainly something that you can highlight when you're trying to point out the value of archives. The Haugill article mentions using exhibits to connect archival holdings with some kind of anniversary celebration or important event for the organization hosting the archives. So if it's the 150th anniversary of your university being founded, it's probably a great idea to have an exhibit highlighting the history of your university and kind of tying it in with a greater celebration or recognition that's going on. And again, that's just showing that the archives has these important materials that help document the history of the organization that they are a part of. Or maybe there's some important anniversary or event going on in the public. That can be a great opportunity for archives to use an exhibit to connect their materials with whatever is going on in society as well. So again, just kind of showing the relevance and the value of archival materials. And just generally speaking, exhibits can be seen as a service to a community, especially if they are if they're helping people in a community that have maybe been marginalized in the past, and they're developing exhibits that maybe demonstrate the history of a community or provide a different perspective on a community that hasn't been available or really known as much as it probably should be. Archives can develop exhibits kind of highlighting those voices and highlighting those perspectives. And that can definitely be beneficial to a community. And that's another way that archives can use exhibits to highlight their relevance and highlight the role that they play in society. So of course, all of this discussion surrounding exhibits and sort of the possibilities of exhibits and what exhibits can do have to go back to this idea of archival infrastructure and the different types of infrastructure that we have talked about these last couple of weeks, and that we'll continue to talk about for the rest of the semester. So developing and putting on an exhibit can take a lot of time, and it can take a lot of energy. So in the Sims article, the author talks about how 2 staff members spend 100 hours doing research. And so, that's in addition to whatever other professional responsibilities they had to juggle at the same time. So, that can be a pretty big use of resources for a library and archive, which may only have, at best, a handful of individuals to work on these exhibits. So when I was at the American Heritage Center at the University of Wyoming, I did an exhibit surrounding the home front in Wyoming during World War I. And yeah, it just took a lot of time to find materials, to do the research so that I could put them in the right context, to figure out how to display them, to make sure that they were sort of set up in the way that I wanted them to. And yeah, it's just a lot of effort can go into that. Another type of infrastructure that the Sims article talks about is partnerships with Historic New Orleans and Tulane University. So they realized that we don't really have as many records related to Black history in Louisiana as we would like. So we want to engage in partnerships with other organizations in order to kind of round out our exhibit and add records to it that we otherwise could not add to the exhibit. So relationships with other individuals and organizations can definitely be something that is a part of the infrastructure that an exhibit can take. So when I was developing my World War I exhibit, I worked a little bit with the Wyoming State Archives to find some records related to the medical response to World War I, and kind of relatedly the Spanish influenza outbreak that was going on at the time. So kind of a limited partnership, but a partnership nonetheless. They also talked about getting some materials from the Library of Congress. So using those materials, maybe more of an informal partnership. The staff that were working on the exhibit needed to have a knowledge of history and Black history in Louisiana. So that is another example of staff infrastructure. Not everyone is going to have that background. So those are some examples related to the Sims article. And the Tatsumi article, they talk about how the praying exhibit was a part of an annual exhibition. And so they were able to have the freedom of action to choose what collection they wanted to highlight. So, if they didn't have this freedom of action, then maybe someone higher up the food chain sort of said, we want you to do an exhibit about this collection. And maybe it wasn't a collection they were necessarily interested in highlighting, but because they had this freedom of action, they were able to develop an exhibit surrounding a collection that they really wanted to increase support and knowledge for. The Tatsumi article talks about a relationship with the National Archives to include some of their records in the praying exhibit. And that's certainly an influential partnership to have. So going back to this idea of partnership, no archive is going to have all of the records related to a particular topic that might be helpful to include in an exhibit. So anytime you can have a relationship with another institution that may have records that can be useful, that's definitely going to be beneficial. And it can allow you to have an exhibit that's maybe able to provide more context or includes materials that are maybe more visually striking and interesting, and that's going to benefit your exhibit as a whole. So it just goes back to the idea of partnerships and relationships with other individuals and organizations. And I think that it goes back to the importance of developing relationships both inside and outside of your organization, so that you do have these partnerships and relationships to draw on if you should need to use them, whether it's to develop an exhibit or for other reasons as well. Certainly facilities is a big one. If you're doing a physical exhibit, you need to have somewhere to put the exhibit itself. Holdings, again, the better holdings you have, the better your exhibit will be. The better you'll be able to have a variety of different materials instead of just having all correspondence, which could be kind of boring. The stronger your collection material is, the richer your exhibit will be. And again, you can kind of supplement this by having partnerships with other organizations and entities, but it'll be less work if you just sort of have them on hand, available to use without having to sort of beg and borrow records from other institutions. Obviously, developing an exhibit requires a strong organizational culture and planning system. When I developed my World War I exhibit, there were a lot of meetings with other people at the American Heritage Center just to make sure that everything was kind of progressing and going well. So it does take a lot of organization planning to carry off something which can be pretty sophisticated and have a lot of moving parts, whether it's an online exhibit or a physical one. There's a lot that needs to be done, and it certainly takes organization and planning to allow that to happen. So yeah, lots of infrastructure goes into developing an exhibit, no matter what type it is. And type of exhibit is something that the lesser article, especially, or the lesser chapter, focuses on. So the difference between having exhibits that are just kind of sort of treasure exhibits saying, look at these materials, to ones that are more focused on having a narrative and are more focused on developing contextual relationships. And the lesser chapter seems to really support the idea of having more narrative exhibits. It talks about how more narrative exhibits allow archival fragments to point to a wider context, allows archival fragments to acquire an agency of its own. And narrative exhibits really allow people to just tell a story that is going to draw people in, is going to engage them, especially people that are unfamiliar with archives. So if you are able to take, a series of materials and develop this nice narrative around them, demonstrate how they're all related to each other and how they might be related to additional resources outside of the archive, that is something that can be really engaging, and again can go a long way towards demonstrating the overall value of archives to the public. Of course, going back to the idea of infrastructure, have these exhibits that are really narrative and really focus on contextual relationships, they can take more time to develop because it takes more time to do research. It takes more time to figure out which records are the best records to tell a particular story. And that can result in more work for the individuals working on the exhibit. Whereas if you just have a bunch of things in a room or, in an online exhibit that might look nice, but there isn't a whole lot connecting them, that's maybe a more straightforward process. It requires less research. And so that is a type of exhibit which might be less infrastructure intensive than a more narratively focused exhibit. But it seems like at least Lester, and I would agree here, would argue that a more narrative, contextually based exhibit provides more of an opportunity to engage with the public. In addition to what type of exhibit an archives wants to put on, another important consideration is what topic that exhibit is going to cover and which items support a topic. And so there's some important questions to think about when you are deciding, what the theme of your exhibit is going to be and which items support your theme. So you could think about, what is the goal of your exhibit? Who are we trying to reach? What are we trying to do with this exhibit? Are we targeting a particular person? Yes. Do we know what this person is interested in, or, what kind of topics or themes they like? Yes, hopefully you do. Okay, so that should really influence what the topic of our exhibit is. So again, it just kind of goes back to knowing who you're trying to influence, knowing at least a little bit about them, and adjusting your outreach activities to make an exhibit more appealing to them, and to in turn make them value archives more than they might otherwise if you have an exhibit that is about horticulture, when really they're big athletics fans, and they'd probably be more interested in seeing an exhibit about the university's basketball or football team. And then you want to think about how can chosen items support the goal that we've established. So, we have our goal, we have our topic that we think is going to reach that goal. And so which individual items best support that topic, and in turn best support the goal that we have established. But again, it all starts, with the goal. So in the Tatsumi article, the author talks about how their goal was to generate interest and support for a collection and a topic that was largely unknown to the local community. So the Prang collection had a lot of international support, a lot of interest from researchers in Japan, but not a lot of people at the university or the surrounding area really knew about it. And so, it wasn't really valued by the people that were most directly affiliated with the the people that were taking care of the collection. And so they decided to frame the Prang collection through a topic that really demonstrated the multidisciplinary value of the records. And they developed sub-themes that connected to the main theme. So they really were aware of what they wanted to accomplish, and they chose the themes that they felt would best support their goal of making the collection more resonant to the campus and to the local community. In the Sims article, they were really interested in connecting archival materials to a topic and issues deeply familiar to the community. So this idea that Black history and slavery in Louisiana was being whitewashed, and they really wanted to provide a more nuanced perspective on what the experience of Black individuals in Louisiana really was. And so, you know, that's the topic that they focused on, and the items that they selected supported that topic. So, you know, in theory, it's a pretty straightforward connection, right? You have a goal, you have a topic of an exhibit that you think is going to achieve that goal, and then you select items that that are going to support that topic. Of course, then you have to get back to this idea of holdings and having, you know, items and collections that are able to meet the goals and topics that you have in mind. So to get back to this idea of infrastructure. And in the Preng collection, they were really focused on using materials that emphasize the connection between the collection and American culture and American history. Again, because they wanted to make the public aware of the relevance of the Preng collection to sort of their lives and their interests. And they also wanted to connect the collection to other courses and topics taught at the University of Maryland. So that influenced which items they chose as well. So again, you know, goal, topic, items that support that topic. If you have a goal and you have themes and items that don't really support that goal, then you're not going to have an exhibit that meets or is successful in achieving the goal that you want it to. And you're just kind of wasting time and resources to develop something that's not really helping you in the way that you want to be helped. So the Howgill article talks a little bit more specifically about item selection. So balancing items that reveal the storyline or help develop this narrative with ones that are visually appealing. So that's certainly an important consideration. You know, correspondence can be really helpful as far as conveying information, but it's not that interesting to look at. And it can be kind of deterring to the public if you go in and expect them to read, you know, like 50 letters in your exhibit, and that's really all that you have. So kind of striking this balance between conveying knowledge, but also being visually interesting is pretty important. In the Prang exhibit, they featured items that could be appreciated without annotated interpretation. So a lot of them were in Japanese, so they wanted to have graphic images. And they also included titles in English. So yeah, you just have to understand that people want to see things that are visually appealing, and that is going to be something that's really going to engage the public and want them to move through your exhibit and learn more about the topic that the exhibit is related to, and hopefully in turn develop an appreciation for the archives. The Sims article really mentions about how they focus on having a variety of items, so artwork, pieces of music, and that's always a good thing to have as well, but at the same time, you need to have kind of a coherent narrative and a coherent perspective as well. So that's kind of another balancing act between having a variety of different material types, but also having items that, again, support the topic that your exhibit is trying to educate people about. So kind of another fine line for archivists to walk when they are developing exhibits. It's also interesting to think about how controversial the Nichols State exhibit ended up being. And that was something that I think that they were aware of, but they kind of chose to move forward and continue working with the topic that they did. But yeah, things like race relations, in an area that has certainly had a lot of difficulty handling race relations in the past, like Louisiana. It can be a pretty hot button issue, and that's something that you should think in mind when you're developing a topic as well. Is this a topic that might aggravate people whose support we need in the future? Are we willing to take that risk? And just kind of weigh the pros and cons of doing that. So yeah, the Sims article talks pretty explicitly about how administrators at Nichols State were not thrilled with her exhibit. I think they talked about how the university president went to the opening of a convenience store on campus instead of the exhibit opening. But the faculty at the university were supportive. So again, you just kind of have to think about the pros and cons of a particular topic and how it relates to your overall outreach and advocacy goals. Another choice that archives have to make when developing an exhibit is if it's going to be a digital exhibit that's more online or a physical exhibit. And there are certainly pros and cons related to this, which the Lester article especially touches on. So with the physical exhibit, it provides more opportunities for researchers to have a more emotional response to records that they're seeing, to see sort of the record in front of you as opposed to through computer screen can cause people to sort of resonate with the records more and maybe value the records more and in turn value the archives. But of course, there are benefits to digital exhibits as well. So they offer some magnification and manipulation possibilities that physical exhibits don't. Digital exhibits can provide more opportunities for archivists to develop this dense narrative web and this dense contextual web. And we'll talk about that later on, but they can just link to other materials in ways that physical exhibits can't do as well. So yeah, again, you just kind of have to think about who your intended audience is, how likely it is that your intended audience is going to actually come and walk through an exhibit in person, or if they're more likely to look at something online. You have to think about the different infrastructure requirements for each exhibit, which are going to be different, and just decide, which type of exhibit is going to be the best one for the goal that you have in mind. Another consideration that archivists have to make is how to describe and link together the materials in the exhibit through the exhibit text. So, if you just can't plop things in front of people and expect them to kind of piece everything together, right? You, as an archivist, have to have some kind of narrative role in saying, this is how A is related to B and how so on and so forth. And, you need to use words to develop this narrative that support the themes that you're hoping your exhibit is going to convey. And so, there are some important questions to ask when you're thinking about the type of exhibit text that you're going to include. And these are mentioned in the Howgill article, but things like, are you using vivid stories to connect your visitors? Are you sort of capturing their imagination, or is your narrative just kind of boring and off-putting? Do you have a nice balance between images in your exhibit and text? Is it all just images and no text? Is it like a ton of text and only a few images? Ideally, you want to have a good balance between the two. Our page is easily readable with short wall-spaced paragraphs. Anytime I encounter a big block of text in a paper or a book or something, like my brain just starts to go numb. So you want to have text that's kind of broken up and easily digestible by people as they're moving through your exhibit. So yeah, your exhibit text can really make or break your exhibit as far as how engaging it is for people, how readily they are going to move through your exhibit, and so there are just a lot of important considerations that go into exactly what that text looks like. And again, you have to have the knowledge and do the research to figure out what the story is that you're going to tell, right? To tell how all of these different records are related. So, again, it can involve a lot of time and effort in just doing the research to write the exhibit text in the first place. And then, of course, you have to sort of write it, and, it can be a pretty intensive process. Okay, so we've touched on contextual relationships before, but they can be really important things to establish in an exhibit. And they can be the key to developing this dense narrative that can really demonstrate the value of archival materials. And again, this is a place where online and digital exhibits can really excel. So they can provide great ways for your exhibit to link to other holdings that the institution might have, or even holdings at other institutions. So, if your exhibit is about X topic and you know that another archive has papers or digital collections related to your exhibit topic, then you can link out to those too and really sort of build up the body of knowledge that your viewers can access. If they want to, that's great. They don't have to, but it's there if they want to go ahead and try and learn more and go even deeper. And also having these contextual relationships really allows viewers of your exhibit to see maybe new meanings in your archives and understand your archives records in a way that they wouldn't be able to if they just have this kind of self-contained bucket of information. So, anytime you provide more context for something, you're really allowing people to have the freedom to sort of think about exhibit materials and engage with exhibit materials in a variety of ways instead of just one very focused and specific way. And I think that that's something that can really appeal to people that may want to get something out of your exhibit that can be quite different from what the person next to them wants to get out. So providing the tools to develop these contextual relationships, especially again in an online format, can really allow exhibit viewers a lot of freedom to sort of develop their own meanings and their own understandings of the records. And I think that that's something that people will appreciate and make them value the archive more. So it's important to give people the freedom to kind of make their own conclusions and understandings from what they see in exhibit, but it's also important to provide a nice structure that allows them to do that in a coherent and supported way. And so that's where these concepts of navigation and design go in. So, think of the jellyfish. The jellyfish is like perfectly designed for what it needs to do. It floats through the ocean and it grabs things with its tentacles and eats them. Like, it's just perfectly designed. And a good exhibit is going to be designed in a way that that meets the needs of the exhibit and the purpose of the exhibit as well. So if you have an exhibit that's overwhelming, it can lead to the museum fatigue that the Howgill article talks about. So this combination of mental and physical fatigue. And that can be true for digital exhibits as well. Like if you are looking at a digital exhibit and you're just like burning your brain out trying to figure out how to get from one part of the exhibit to the other, then that's gonna it may make you want to just sort of turn off and go look at TikTok for an hour or whatever. So you're not really going to experience the exhibit in a way that is going to be beneficial, or in a way that's going to help you appreciate the archives and want to support the archives in the future, or think of the archives as being a valuable contributor to society or to your organization. So again, you just want to have something that's not overwhelming, that has some sort of logical presentation. You want to have sections that provide complementary information. So like a focus within your exhibit is really helpful, so that you don't have maybe things related to a variety of different themes within one exhibit, because that can get confusing. It's important to have a design that reflects the narrative. So, if you have a narrative or a topic that's maybe pretty heavy, then you probably don't want to have colors and textures and fonts that are really like bright and airy, and that can be kind of jarring and confusing to people. You just want to have something that is easy for people to understand and navigate through. And you want to have something that people can sort of pick and choose and move through as they like. If you just have something that's linear and people can't really choose how they work their way through the exhibit, or people can't really choose what they're looking at a given time, then that can start to feel a little bit constraining, and it may lead to people having to kind of move through parts of the exhibit that contain information that they're just not interested in. And that can be a turnoff as well. So the Howgill article talks about having an exhibit designed that can draw the visitor through it with a minimal amount of effort on their part. So, just something that people can kind of bounce around and move through as they like. And again, this really speaks to having things like hyperlinks and menus and other navigational tools that allow this sort of freedom of action to take place. And one of the benefits of online exhibits is that obviously you can have things like this, whereas in a physical exhibit, how people move through the exhibit is a little more structured, right? They're just in, a room, or maybe a particular space, and at least to a certain degree, they have to kind of go through materials to maybe get where they want. Whereas in an online exhibit, there's ideally more of an opportunity for people to kind of bounce around and have that freedom to sort of choose their own adventure. And of course, these hyperlinks and other navigational tools can link to additional learning opportunities if people choose to pursue them or not. Some will want to learn more, some people won't. But again, it's always important to give them that opportunity to make that choice, instead of an archivist making that choice for them when they are developing the design of an exhibit. And a lot of this goes back to information seeking behavior, which we'll talk about later on. But yeah, people just want information quickly, they want it easily, and some people are going to be interested in really boiling down and getting into the nitty-gritty of a topic, and some people are going to want to have a pretty superficial experience. And ideally, you make navigation and design choices in your exhibit that allow both of these individuals to go into the same exhibit and have a good experience. So yeah, just to go back to this idea that the goal of your exhibit should should determine every decision that you make. So is it a treasures exhibit, or is it something that's really narratively focused and has a lot of contextual information? Is it a an exhibit that's going to be solely online? Is it going to be solely physical? Maybe something in the middle? You know, that should be done with your goal in mind. Which exhibit text do we choose? Which navigation and design choices do we make? You know, all of these should really be focused on why you're creating the exhibit in the first place and what outreach and advocacy goal you want to achieve. Because again, if you don't keep your goal in mind, then you know, you may be putting a lot of effort into something which really isn't achieving what you want it to achieve, and that's, you know, it can be a big waste of resources. And of course, as I've touched on throughout this lecture, sort of overshadowing all of this is the idea of infrastructure. This idea that the decisions that you make really need to be based on the resources that you can bring to bear. If you don't have staff members with a ton of time, then maybe a really dense narrative exhibit isn't the best idea. If you aren't able to partner with someone that's going to help you host an online exhibit, then, you know, that may eliminate an online exhibit as a possibility. If you don't really have strong leadership in place, then you may have to think about having an exhibit that is a little more simpler and straightforward and doesn't require sort of a ton of direction and effort to put into place. So yeah, you have to think about your goals, but you also have to be realistic about the infrastructure that you have in place when you're thinking about the best type of exhibit to attempt. And of course, an incredibly important part of exhibits as well, and really every aspect of outreach, is this idea of evaluation. You need to know if your exhibit is being effective in achieving the goal that you want it to. If not, maybe you can change things around in the middle of the exhibit, especially an online exhibit. And getting information from different individuals after the exhibit concludes can be important as well. So there can be ongoing evaluation, also kind of a post-mortem evaluation that will help you decide, okay, did the decisions that we make support the goal that we had in mind? You know, was the goal that we had in mind the best goal for our archives? And just kind of go through the whole process and think about, okay, you know, what went well, what didn't go well, and that can really shape future decisions that you make about hosting exhibits, you know, later on down the road. And if things went poorly, you can avoid doing those things again. If things went well, then you can think about, okay, well, this and this and this went well, so the next time we do an exhibit, let's make sure that we keep this in mind. This and this didn't go so well, so let's try to improve that the next time around. But if you don't do evaluation, if you don't know what worked and what didn't, then you might be doomed to repeat mistakes that you made in the past. And again, that can just result in a lot of resources, a lot of infrastructure just being wasted on something that at best isn't going to help your archives, and at worst may actually make people think less of your archives. You know, if they go into your exhibit and they think, wow, you know, all of those items were boring. I didn't understand what the theme was. I didn't really understand why they organized the exhibit in the way that they did. You know, there weren't really any links to any external sources for me to kind of follow up and look at. You know, I don't really know that this archive is worthy of support, or I don't know that this archive is something that I want to advocate for in the future. And if you don't learn from your mistakes, then you can have that situation just kind of repeat and repeat and repeat. And that's not going to be healthy for your archive in the long run at all. So the Prang article has some interesting examples of evaluation that they did. So developing tools to evaluate reactions to the exhibit and the potential for people to use the collection in research. They monitored different contacts and inquiries that were coming into the archive to see if people that were interested in the Prang collection heard about from the exhibit. The How Google article talks about visual analysis, so just seeing people moving through the exhibit, and that's something that can be done online or on site. Evaluating and interviewing visitors. So there are a lot of ways this evaluation can take place, but it's just such an important part of every type of outreach, and especially one that can be as labor and infrastructure intensive as exhibits typically are. Okay, so that's it for this week's lecture. A lot of the things that I talked about in the lecture and a lot of things in the readings for this week are things that you're going to have to address for the exhibit that you're going to be making. So definitely look at the tables in the How Go article. I think on page 183 is the criteria for online collection or online exhibits. So definitely call back to that. And yeah, I hope that you learn more about exhibits. I hope that you know more about what an effective exhibit looks like. And I'm interested to see how you translate what you've learned, or maybe even what you already know, into your exhibit that you'll turn in later on in the semester. So as always, let me know if you have any questions, and take care.